Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our series of lectures on the Exalted Treatise on the Response of the Tao. We continue this very long section on the different misdeeds. We'll focus today on about four sentences. The first one is, as it says here, to procure false fame and reputation. So if we break it down into a word-by-word analysis of the Chinese characters, you can see that the first two words relate to this idea of, buying. And it's more than just sort of simply spending money. It's the idea that you're trying to manipulate, you're trying to use various techniques or strategies to gain this false positive reputation. Now, this reputation could be just, increasing your profile, your popularity, public image. So this fame and reputation could be manifested in a number of different ways. But the point of this wrongdoing and why it's wrong is because you're, in a way, spinning or crafting a positive public image that is false. Now, I think the key word here is this idea of falsehood. What is a false reputation? Well, it's a reputation that is unsubstantiated by one's actual competence and character. And it's not just what one can do, but more importantly, the good deeds that one has done. So this idea of fame is sort of, what you might say that you've done, but the reality is what you have done. So, say what you've done versus what you say you've done. And it's false because there's a discrepancy between what you've said you've done or what you're trying to sell yourself off as being able to do or have done, and the reality is that you can't. So more importantly, it's not just competence or capability, what we might call today the skills and the knowledge that we have, but more importantly, our character. And I think that this is very important, and I want to spend some time exploring with you, is this so-called discrepancy between our virtue and the reputation that we have. So what is the relationship between reputation and virtue? How do they come together? Are they sort of one and the same? Or is there some sort of cause and effect? Well, virtue comes first. Virtue being the good thoughts, intentions, the good words and deeds that we have, sort of relates to this virtue, but obviously it stems from our mind, what we're thinking, our kind intentions, thoughts of helping others. That's the cause. That's really what comes first. And reputation is not one and the same, but actually it follows. It's a type of good fortune that results from our good deeds. So and you can understand why it would be a type of good fortune, because if you have a good reputation, then people will naturally admire you. You have people who praise you, respect you. As a result, you might have many followers, or people who want to understand you better, and therefore you might have a better position, etc., etc. So the reputation is the good fortune that results from one's good intentions, kind mind, kindness, and it's like a shadow that follows its form. What we said at the beginning of the Exalted Treatise, the first line is that good fortune follows us. What we've done, like a shadow, follows its form. So we have to realize that virtue comes first and reputation is what follows. And this reputation actually comes about naturally as a result of of our virtue, of our character, our good character. And this reputation then is something that will naturally be able to help others achieve excellence. And therefore, that's why it sort of comes after. If you remember in the earlier section of the Exalted Treatise, this idea of good fortune, there are different types. So here is the early extract. It says that a good person, so someone who, as I said before, has this kind heart, kind words, kind actions, good deeds, they will be naturally respected. They will naturally have this good reputation and be blessed by the spirits who met out reward and punishment. So they are deserving of that rewards, good fortune. As a result, they enjoy happiness and wealth. So that's not hard to understand. If you are naturally someone who has this kind heart to help others, you will put more effort into your work, in your studies. You will be more competent. And as a result of that, people will recognize that, provide you with a senior position, with a job or a position that corresponds to your abilities, your skills, and therefore you'll achieve this salary. So this is something that you think is actually quite logical. It's not just wealth that rains down from the heavens. This is something that comes about because of your abilities, and those abilities come about because of your natural diligence, your wanting to learn this skill, craft, or knowledge to the extent that you can be of worth and contribute to others. So therefore, this person, of course, they will have this position, they will have this wealth or salary, and not only is this something that creates happiness for them, but it's their ability to get along with others and to have these harmonious relationships because they're thinking about others. And therefore they remain safe from misfortunes, whether it's natural or man-made misfortunes, etc. And they are successful in all their endeavors. So you can see that the virtue is the cause, and all of this, good fortune, including the reputation, is what follows, to the extent that they might transcend this mortal life, this human life that has, a limited lifespan, and become an immortal according to the Taoist tradition. So in order to transcend the human life, then it's also the same cause, but also the same factors of doing good. So this is also reflected in the Confucian canon, in the Practice of the Mean, one of the 4 foundational texts of Confucianism. There's a line there that talks about how a person of great virtue will inevitably and necessarily gain good position, prosperity through a good salary, in a high position. Then they will attain good reputation and longevity, so health and long life. And this particular line was used to describe King Shun, who we know from the early antiquity or high antiquity period of Chinese history, was someone who was an exemplar of family reverence, an exemplar of really sort of caring for his family members, his parents and his brother, despite their and this family reverence was the very source and origin of his great virtue. So it wasn't just kindness to his family, but also to others in the community. And this naturally led him to be chosen as King Yao's successor. And therefore he gained the position of ruling the land, prosperity, reputation, etc., and ultimately lived to a very long age. So not only is this idea of the relationship between virtue and reputation or name, fame, seen in the Taoist canon, but also within the Confucian canon. And we can see that this reputation, therefore, is quite something that comes about naturally. And it is deserved because it is through this reputation that this person of great virtue is able to help others. They are able to help others because through their words and actions, they provide a very good example, a role model, so that others can also achieve excellence. Now, from this, you will see that reputation in itself is not negative. It's not in itself, it's not negative. It can be positive and it can be negative. In this particular sentence, it's a positive thing because Shun, with his abilities, with his virtue, he gains this reputation. He gains the position of being the ruler of the Chinese Empire at that time, and is able to then affect changes in the community, leading to a golden age in high antiquity. So this reputation, therefore, is a positive thing if there is the corresponding virtue. So that's what we need to be clear about. Now, if a person is respected, they have this reputation, but they're not able to help others, right? And if they are not only not able to help others, but in fact, through their words and their actions, they influence others negatively. For example, only help making people think more about their appearance, their clothing, etc. Then actually this reputation is negative because it multiplies their demerits. So it's through this reputation, through their influence, that they can make an impact on others, but they're making the wrong impact. And therefore, this multiplies the negative effects that they have. And therefore their demerits, and therefore their misfortune. So this is something that is quite something that we have to be very careful about. As the treatise explains, that if we have good fortune, but there's no corresponding virtue, then what happens is that it leads to demerits, which then lead to misfortune. And this particular extract, which we read earlier in the text, explains, and it's almost like the complete opposite of the good fortune, isn't it? So the person, their lifespan is depleted, but as this occurs, they may not feel it, but they will incur poverty, so loss of wealth. They will incur much distress. They'll have troubles, whether it's in their relationships, the people around them, their family, their company, etc. And their reputation suffers. In other words, people will despise them. They won't respect them. They will find that they're disgraced in some way. They have misfortunes, know no joy or happiness, but be tormented by various disasters. And then ultimately their lifespan is depleted. So that's why reputation is something that was sort of a double-edged sword. It's not negative in itself, but it can be negative. Something that can be quite harmful to us if it's not understood in the right way. In fact, if it becomes our sole priority or focus, this reputation, then that's when it becomes self-destructive, because we lose focus on what we need to do, what is most important, and that is this virtue. That is our character, our cultivation. So this reputation is negative, particularly when it is false, when it is unsubstantiated by actual cultivation, actual goodness. Because, as you can see, it leads to demerits, which are then multiplied because of your influence, and then it leads to your self-harm, this misfortune. And the Taoist texts are particularly, they particularly highlight this. So in the Tao Te Ching, which is one of the key early works of the Confucian canon, reminds us here about, the difference between this reputation versus character. So this particular chapter asks us, what is more important? Is it our name in the sense of our reputation, or our character, this person being our character? So obviously, based on our discussion just now, it would be this character is most important, because the reputation is what follows that. The other question that is put to us here is, what's worth more? This body that we have, this self, physical, mental well-being, or the possessions that we have? Now, clearly, what's external is secondary. What's of primary importance is this our health, because if we have this health and we are able to learn more, to develop our skills, which will then generate wealth and therefore more goods. So the goods cannot be enjoyed if we ourselves are unwell, sick, or if our lifespan is depleted. So therefore, we have to have our priorities straight. And the next part says, well, therefore, we have to be content. It reminds us to be content with our status, with what we have now, rather than pursuing and chasing something that is really just like a shadow. If we are content with what we have, we need to focus on what we have here and now, develop, cultivate that, and therefore we won't be disgraced. We won't suffer harm, or, as we said before, different forms of misfortune. And you can see here the Tao Te Ching corresponds to the Exalted by saying that if you know when to stop, you won't meet any danger. This misfortune live longer. So this Tao Te Ching, as you can see, that the Exalted Treatise is very much from the 12th century, but it relates to the Tao Te Ching, one of the earliest works of the Taoist canon. Another work of the early Taoist canon is that of the Zhuangzi, and I've taken a very famous anecdote from the Zhuangzi in one of the chapters called the Autumn Floods, and it's about this philosopher whom these works are attributed to. And one time he's fishing. Now, the fact that it says that he's fishing means, of course, that he's not a government official. He doesn't have a position in court, but actually he's a recluse. In other words, in those days, there were people who sort of intentionally didn't nominate or didn't want to be recommended for an official position. They didn't want to be part of that rat race of gaining any sort of nomination and reputation, but was someone who wanted to keep a low profile. And we have to sort of understand that that's not because he's lazy or he doesn't want to make a difference, but in the times in which he was living was the Warring States period. At that time, you can tell from the name of that period in Chinese history, from the 5th to the 3rd century BCE, that it was a period of much civil war, but also interstate warfare, and therefore called the Warring States period. So this was at a time of great turmoil, and the governments they were at a loss as to what to do, and in many ways there was really just a lot of power play. So the rulers were thinking about how to improve their territories over and above thinking of the quality of life of the people. So perhaps during such times, having office, this political position might have been ineffectual in actually helping the people, and therefore Zhuangzi is a recluse. So what happens, when he's living this life, away from the capital? The king of Chu, so the state of Chu, the ruler, sends two officials who finds him and says, well, I'd like to trouble you with the administration of my realm. So basically, he receives an offer for work, and it's not just any kind of work, not just a minor role, but actually perhaps the highest government position in the state. He, perhaps, the administration of my realm. It sounds like he's the king wants to appoint him as the chancellor. So this is, almost like someone coming up to you and saying, we'd like you to be the CEO of our company, and it's, a multinational company as well. It's a very big role. So this role with all the trappings of, good salary, great title, great house, etc. So it's the complete package. This is a very important appointment. But what is Zhuangzi, his reaction? Let's look at the next passage. He holds onto his fishing rod and without even turning his head. So in other words, he completely ignores these two officials who have just, given him the opportunity of a lifetime to be the chancellor of this state of Chu. And he starts telling them about a story. Okay, it's a story about a tortoise. And it's a true story. It says, well, there was a sacred turtle in the state of Chu, and of course it's been dead. It's passed away 3,000 years ago, but its shell, its remains are kept in the ancestral temple, and it's quite sacred. So perhaps there's people worship its remains. Now, the question that he puts to the two officials is, what do you think? Would this turtle rather be alive, or would it rather be dead? So would this tortoise, if it had a choice, say for example, it hasn't been dead for 3,000 years, still alive now, do you think it'd be rather like to be alive and so dragging its tail through the mud, enjoying its freedom, or would it rather be, for the fact of being honored in the ancestral temple, be dead and just have its bones honored? Well, of course, the natural answer, the two officials both have the same response, and of course, the turtle would rather be alive. And therefore, Zhuangzi then says, well, you have my answer. I would rather be here, enjoy my freedoms, like that turtle dragging its tail through the mud. And therefore, there's no need to talk to me about this position or offer anymore. You're wasting your time. You should just leave. So it's a rather interesting story, a very famous story about, this idea of the recluse. And in some ways, for us today, it might be quite extreme. The idea that, is Zhuangzi not ambitious? Does he not want to pursue a better career? But actually, what Zhuangzi is emphasizing is to avoid the trappings of what we might say conventional successful life, having this name, title, good position, good salary, etc., and to really focus on what are priorities. And I think that it's in keeping with the times, the the contemporary times, so the times in which Zhuangzi found himself in this Warring States period, in which perhaps people were pursuing this false reputation, pursuing titles and government positions to what end? So he's trying to sort of turn that on its head and get us to question, why am I doing this? Why am I in this rat race? So, it's, as I said, it's not about him being unambitious, but really it's understanding what are our priorities. And what's the best way to achieve our priorities? Is it through a title? Is it through that position? Or is there some other way? And perhaps he feels that this living a life away from the capital may in fact have greater impact. Teaching, for example, people who want to learn about this philosophy of thinking of, the right way of living, etc. And rather than being that official in this government position that has a lot of risk. There's the highs and the lows of political life. You're sort of at the whim of the ruler or the senior ministers in their favor. You could be demoted. You could be disgraced, humiliated, framed, and ultimately executed because you're in the wrong crowd. And therefore, you become a pawn in this political power play. And when really, perhaps what Zhuangzi wants to achieve is a society of stability, a stable society, a more harmonious society. And achieving or taking that role, would it have achieved that? Or was it just a matter of filling the ranks for the sake of the ruler? So this anecdote shouldn't be read in the sense that we should renounce or reject all success or all reputation, but it should be read in the sense of questioning, what is it for, and can it achieve what are my priorities? So based on this exploration, you can see that if we take the position, but we're not able to actually do the work that we are set out to do, fulfill our responsibilities in achieving societal stability as a government official, then it may in fact lead to demerit and therefore misfortune. There's another story in the Zhuangzi, in the very first chapter, and it's about King Yao. And remember we said that King Yao was in history a very virtuous leader himself, and he abdicated in favor of King Shun. So he was someone who knew that his son was incompetent, and he wanted to find a worthy successor. He wanted to pass on this the throne, the rulership, to someone who could actually help the community and not just sort of pass it on to someone within his family so that he could continue enjoying prestige, etc. So prior to sort of abdicating to Shun, it says in the Zhuangzi that he wanted to cede the empire to another sort of worthy called Xu You. And this is his conversation. He says to Xu You, when the sun and the moon have come out, it's a waste of light to go on burning the torches, isn't it? So this is a bit of an analogy, saying, well, clearly the sun and the moon were the brightest celestial objects. The ancients thought they were the brightest celestial objects, sun in the daytime, the moon in the nighttime. And if it is, you're under the sunlight or the moonlight, then, your little torch is really ineffective, isn't it? So why waste that energy? It's no use burning the torch. And similarly, when there's rain, then why go on irrigating the fields? The water coming out from our hose is nothing compared to the rain from the skies. So why bother? So he's using this analogy to talk about himself, his virtue versus Shuyou, and trying to say that Shuyou is someone who has this great virtue, like the rain, like the sun. And he's just, the small torch and the water coming out of the hose. He says, if I give you this position, then the world will be ordered. If I go on in this position as the ruler, as the king, all I can see are my failings. I have so many weaknesses. So please, you are the one who is capable of taking this job. Please, I appoint you as my successor. Take this role. But what does Shuyou say? He says, the way you're governing, you can see that, there's stability. It's, everyone's very happy. It's an age of prosperity. So you're already doing a fine job. If I take your place, am I just doing it for the name? Am I just taking it because I want to be called a leader, a king? And he says this famous line that the name is only the guest of reality. And am I only playing the part of a guest? And he goes on to talk about actually he's very content with the life that he has. He uses also two analogies. A bird builds its nest in the deep woods and uses just one branch. So obviously in the forest, there are a lot of trees, a lot of branches, but the bird only needs one branch as its home for its nest. The mole drinks of the river, but actually they only need a bellyful. They're not going to be going around carrying a lot of water bottles. That's all they can take, and that's all they really need. In other words, I'm very content with the simple life that I have. I have no need for the palace, all the servants, calling the whole state as my own, when all I really need is not very much. And therefore, he says, I have no use for the rulership of the world. Please, you don't need to talk to me about it anymore. So it's a similar theme here, isn't it? Also in the Zhuangzi, this idea that, that we have to really be clear about why it is we're taking on any position, whether this reputation is well deserved. And you can see here that this is probably a reaction or response to the times, that period of time, but it's also emphasizing to us that this reputation, we have to make sure we deserve it before it can be used to good effect, and it won't be self-destructive. So going on from this idea of this guest, so guest is, this reputation is just this name or fame or reputation. It's just a guest, which means it sort of comes and goes. The reality of this, the master, the owner, is ourselves and our character. And if we take that analogy further, this guest, if you think about it, a hotel, is this hotel a 5-star hotel or a 2-star hotel? Well, if it's a 5-star hotel, it will generally have the 5-star facilities like grand ballroom, swimming pool, gym, etc., penthouse. And if you don't have those things, and if you do have those things, you'll naturally attract those high-paying guests. But if you don't have those things, if you are really a 2-star accommodation, then no matter how you market yourself, you're not going to attract those particular guests. So that reputation is something that comes with what you have. So we can't expect to have a good reputation or to be respected if we don't have the character, if we don't have the goods, the goodness in our minds and our hearts. And I want to sort of tease it out. We said already that reputation follows virtue. this virtue is our good mind, our good thoughts, our good deeds, etc. And obviously this leads us to ensure that we work hard in our careers and our studies. But it's not necessarily related to that position. And the reputation itself, or the virtue itself rather, is not just the idea of our knowledge or our skills. Some people might say that, I have a great job because I've, studied hard, in terms of my academic achievements, etc. Because it's actually more than one's academic achievements. It reminds me of recently when we had an academic conference at the academy here, and we had some scholars come over from Taiwan, and we were, in the discussions during lunch, we're talking about various philosophies, and one of the scholars mentioned that they hadn't, been learning about sort of philosophy from a French philosopher, and they, this Taiwan University, very well-known university in Taiwan, had invited this French philosopher over for, a guest lecture, and this is a very eminent scholar in philosophy, and it's well published, etc. It really has the knowledge and the skills in this particular learning. But what happened and what really made them question this person was, this philosopher came over, he, made his talk, did the speech, and then thereafter refused to talk to anyone in the faculty, and just sort of stayed in his room and didn't want to talk to the local academics. And this really made them question what his philosophy was about and his learning, because obviously scholarship is about learning from others and sharing that learning. So it's not just the books that you write, the publications, the journal articles, or the conferences, the conference talks, but actually how you are as a person. Are you the kind of person who is able to share this knowledge and contribute as a way of life? It's not just necessarily on stage when you have to give a talk that you're paid for example. So, as a result of that, they really sort of questioned this person, and you can see from that a reputation is more than just one's knowledge or skills in a certain discipline or field. It's actually who you are as a person, and the reputation is whether this virtue of respecting others, this mutual respect for others. And if we don't have that, then perhaps this reputation is undeserved. Ultimately, from the Taoist perspective, which we've looked through the Tao Te Ching, we've looked at the Zhuangzi, two foundational works, but the ultimate goal is, as it says here, in the Tao Te Ching, another particular line, in which it talks about how the great Tao flows expansively, and it's omnipotent, it's omnipresent, and basically this great Tao, which is this often translated as the way, is what nourishes all things, like the seasons, the sun, the seasonal patterns of the weather, spring, summer, autumn, and that's what causes life to grow. With life, with crops, we have our food, etc., and we are nourished. And all of this, as it states, this Tao, the way that the world should revolve, the way that it should be, is it is always giving. It's sort of what underlies the workings of everything, but yet it doesn't take ownership, doesn't dominate and consider itself a master, and expect people to worship it. And you can see in the last line that actually, because it doesn't deem itself as great, hence it is able to be great. So the utmost goal in the Taoist tradition is that we emulate this great Tao, or the great way, in which we are able to help others. We are able to contribute to the society, contribute to the greater community, without expecting any reward, without thinking of ourselves as great, and without claiming that credit, and certainly not claiming any false credit or claiming any false reputation for it, and to just continue cultivating ourselves, and the reputation, the virtue will come naturally. The previous slide that I just skipped across is from the Analects, the words of Confucius. He explains that we shouldn't be concerned about whether we have a job, a particular senior position, a higher rank, but we should be focused on our capabilities, because that's what will ultimately get us there. If we have those capabilities, we will achieve that standing. It's just a matter of time. And we shouldn't be concerned that we're not known. So this reputation, this idea of name and fame, but see, to be worthy to be known. What is it that we are able to offer others? Do we have the requisite virtue and character to be able to help others? And that this is a different perspective from perhaps the modern value that's placed on achieving popularity and influence. As we said, that is not necessarily a bad thing, but it is negative if that becomes our sole focus. Our focus should be on this, what it is that we can ultimately contribute. So that's that line about why it is that achieving, trying to gain some sort of reputation, is not only a misdeed, but also it leads to misfortune. It's ultimately self-harming and detrimental to our own cultivation and our own good fortune. The next line is similar in a way. It's the idea of concealing unscrupulous motives. So if you can see in the word-by-word analysis, it's this idea of storing up some sort of harmful intentions. So clearly, these are intentions that we have that might not be apparent to others on the outside, but only we know, because we know what we're thinking and why we're doing certain things. So clearly, if this mind is deceptive, if we have certain intentions that are deceptive, that are harmful to others, then our words and our actions cannot be virtuous. They cannot be merits. They cannot achieve good fortune. In fact, it's the opposite. Because of how we're thinking about certain things, they end up being demerits, leading to misfortune. And it doesn't matter what the actual action or the word was. It may have been very compassionate, but because it's motivated by this selfish thought, then it becomes a demerit. So that's something that is quite important to remember. So you could say that two people could be doing exactly the same thing. For example, they could be working for a charity, doing exactly the same job. But if their motives are different, then one is going to be accumulating merit and the other person is going to be accumulating demerit, even though they're actually doing the same job. So, one person could be thinking, this is just for, my CV, so that I can, this is just for the salary. It's a very good salary, given that profit organization, and thinking about simply their paycheck and clocking off at 5 o'clock. Whereas the other person who's working for the same charity, doing exactly the same job, is thinking about, well, the clients, let's say the stakeholders, and obviously if it's a not-for-profit, it's for the community. So that other person could be thinking about, making sure that they are doing a good job so that, everyone benefits. And you can see the two intentions are very different. So even though they're working in the same job, one accumulates good fortune, the other person accumulates misfortune or demerits, which lead to misfortune. And generally, this line, also harking back to the previous line, is about our living a genuine life, being sincere, being authentic. And this sincerity is not just saying, oh, I'm true to my intentions, I'm very honest about what I think. It's actually about being honest in the sense that you are cultivating your virtue, your thinking about not your self-benefit, but caring for others. So that's the idea of sincerity from the Chinese philosophy perspective. So in the lectures of Venerable Master Chin Kung, he talks about how when we care for others, do we do so thinking only of the benefit that they might, how useful this person will be to me in the future? Or do we think about how we can respond to their needs in the here and now without thinking about, what they did for me in the past, or what they can do for me in the future? And, therefore, as a result, caring takes on different degrees. You can be very caring towards a person who might be, very rich, versus only sort of, or versus ignoring someone who you think may not have any impact on your life in the future. So this is also the same. This motive is very important, and it's not about sort of seeking out positions or opportunities for good deeds. It's responding to the people around us and the opportunities that present themselves, and responding in the right way, in a genuine way, without thinking about the past or the future, but responding in the here and now to their needs. So that's this idea of making sure your intentions are genuine, are sincere. The next two lines I'm going to cover together because they're sort of two halves of the same coin. First is sort of someone has strengths, they might have achievements, great skills, but you sort of cover that up. So curbing is sort of, they might show their strengths, but you sort of cut them down, undermine them. And then the other thing is that you indulge your own shortcomings. You have clear weaknesses, but you try to cover it up. So you can see how they're really the two things, isn't it? You're always thinking of yourself and coming out on top, outdoing others, and as a result, undermining others and talking yourself up. And this can be quite self-defeating, isn't it? You may think that in the short term this leads to benefit, but actually it is ultimately self-destructive. Because if it's, let's say, the shortcomings, if you conceal it, it means that you're trying to ignore it. You're not actively overcoming these these weaknesses. You're not actively improving yourself anymore. If we have an illness, for example, we would immediately seek medical attention. If you feel some pain, you have a lump somewhere, you would immediately want to find out why is that the case? How can I get my health back in order? But why is it that when we clearly know we have shortcomings in our character, for example, we feel jealousy, we are trying to procure this false reputation, etc., we don't find strategies to think ourselves out of it. Mencius has a very good way of talking about it. And he explains that, if someone has this condition, and even today in medicine, it's recognized as a kind of condition called the trigger finger. And he says, suppose someone has this trigger finger, and this is called a trigger finger because the fourth finger, because of sort of inflammation in the tendons, it's always bent. Now, it doesn't have any pain or any specific hindrance because it just doesn't straighten out. This finger just doesn't straighten out. It needs to have some sort of what we do today is a simple surgery that will really just help it straighten out. Now, Mencius is describing this condition 2,000 years ago, and he's saying that this is also something that doesn't really affect your life. You could still go about your general job. Doesn't affect how you think, your emotions, etc. It's just something that's might be cosmetic, right? But yet, a person might not consider the road to Qing, the states of Qing or Chu, too far. So I've got a map here which sort of describes the state of China during this Warring States period. And the arrow points to the state of Zhou, where Mencius came from. What he's talking about is that, if you take a journey from Zhou to Chu, which you can see is south of that, and Qing, which is on the left, on the sort of west of that, of Chu, you see it's quite a long road, isn't it? In those days, travel was often by foot. You might have to take several months and encounter various difficulties on the way to find a doctor to help you with this problem. And yet Mencius says, well, people wouldn't consider it very far. They would go to all lengths to get this finger straightened out because their finger is not like that of others. But if their heart is not like that of others, they don't think about it too much. And they don't try to address the problem. In fact, they go to great lengths to cover it up and to conceal their shortcomings, their weaknesses. So this is something that Mencius pointed out 2,000 years ago, and was reflected also reflected in the Exalted Treatise. There's a common theme in Chinese philosophy, this idea that we have to cultivate ourselves rather than ignoring these issues. This indulging one's shortcomings, of course, is not just one's own. In the collected commentaries, it talks about how if you see shortcomings in your children, in your grandchildren, family members, would be your siblings, or even good friends, and you have the ability to, and you have their trust to the extent that you can tell them. You can use different ways of trying to help them overcome it. But what you do is you indulge in their shortcomings. You don't tell them, but in fact you encourage them. In fact, then it's also a misdeed. It's the same, sort of comes under the same line. And you see this a lot because you don't want to. Many people find it's too troublesome. You want to be on good terms with the other person. You want to be their friend. You want to be popular. So you don't want to point out their shortcomings. I'd rather you let them think that it's all okay, and you may even encourage them. So that's when it becomes quite dangerous, because if you are a parent or a teacher, for example, then it's actually in your position, in your role, your responsibility to help improve not just the knowledge and the skills, but also the character of your children or your students. And there are very serious consequences for not doing so. There's a story that is from the Collectania on the way in its virtue, and it's related by an official. His name was Zhuo Bantang. He came from the district of Anyi. So this is an official. He's seen or heard of the story within his district, the Anyi district. It's not his personal story, but it's a story of a scholar who was very talented but never passed the civil service examinations. And many people sort of questioned why. Now, one time, this scholar became quite seriously ill, and he had this dream. In the dream, he visited the world of the spirit officials, which we talked about earlier in the Exalted Treatise. And it's sort of a place where, they look at what you've done in your life. And he was told in his dream that his life would soon come to an end, because he had almost completely exhausted his good fortune. And the scholar was quite shocked. He said, there must be some miscalculation. There's something wrong here, because I've just been a teacher. I was on a teacher's salary. I can't have, really had such an extravagant lifestyle. I make an honest living. I live a simple life. I'm not a cruel or violent person, and I haven't done anything wrong. So how could it be that my good fortune has been completely exhausted? The official then explained that it is because you draw a teacher's salary, but you neglect your teaching responsibilities. You engage in gaming, gambling. Obviously, this is in his spare time. When he's not teaching, this is what he does. And ultimately, it's to the detriment of your work, that you don't really, you neglect instructing the students. You just draw the salary, but you're not doing a role. And yet you boast of your supposed successes, your talents, your accomplishments. And as a result, you've done nothing to really deserve that salary. So it's as if you've stolen it. And this dishonesty, this misdeed, these accumulated misdeeds have then depleted your good fortune. And the spirit then explains that actually this is a very common problem, common issue, that a person may take a salary, say, for example, in the teacher salary, but then fail to do their job. In the case of a teacher, fail to educate and really guide their students. And as a result of that, people in society at that time, in the same way as people now, might see that there are people quite talented. They're seemingly good, but then they suffer poverty. They may have serious illnesses at a young age, and even die at a young age. And people might think that this is unfair, that there's, the law of cause and effect. It's what happened. But actually, without really knowing the lifestyle of that person, that actually they've brought it on themselves through their own actions. And what happens is that the scholar wakes up from this dream, and sure enough, his illness continues to get worse, to the point that he's bedridden. And in his dying, his final moments, he relates this story and what the spirit official told him to all who was present before passing away. And it was his hope that they wouldn't make the same mistake. And it was this story that was then related to the official. So, coming back to this, the four sort of sentences that we've talked about today, that it sort of boils down to a very common idea, which is that, we shouldn't think about fame or reputation or, trying to curb others' strengths or conceal our own, but focus on what's most important. Focus on what our responsibilities are. If we're working, what is our job? What are the priorities in our job in this position? Are we setting the right example? And, if we aren't, then we have to really address that. We have to make sure that the title and the reputation that we have right now matches what it is that we're doing, our good thoughts, words, and actions. And this is what Mencius was saying, that we need to think about the shortcomings, these weaknesses that we have, just like that if we have this trigger finger. And because that's actually what causes, what's the most important, that, if we have this, we don't have a doctor for the character issues or issues in virtue. But what we do have are these great texts, the canon, Confucian canon, the Taoist canon, of which the Exalted Treatise is a foundational text that then helps us. And by reading these, we read the example, the words, deeds, and actions, the thoughts of the ancients, the good examples, the exemplars. And it helps us then reflect on ourselves like mirrors, that we can see very clearly what it is that we need to work on. So I'll leave you with that thought. Thank you very much for listening, and look forward to seeing you again next week. Thank you very much.